get wired up.
Lousy morning as far as the weather is being concerned, but at least we are maskless, and that is something to celebrate. We can be here without our masks on and enjoy ourselves. Now, first the commercial. We have the AGM coming up on the 22nd of this month. It will be a good speaker. And Dot Page will be talking on the 75th anniversary of the Read Fund and have most of the books that we have donated to on display. So it will be an interesting evening. We want still committee members. As always, we want committee members. If you would like to know more about it, see Moira at the back or Jude, because I'm not going to be here afterwards. Those two can fill you in and take your name if you're interested. So
you use the mic, please?
So this has changed around since the last time I was here. We want committee members and talk to Jude or Moira afterwards about it. So that is the commercial. So now we get to the important part of today's meeting. We want to introduce Will. Will is going to talk about the second trip to Fiordland that they did. And you can see from some of these pictures that you've already looked at that it was a fascinating trip. So we'll hear more from Will. Will is well qualified to do this. It's the second one he's done, plus the journey of Otago's, plus the journey to New Edinburgh. So please welcome Will.
Oh, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and firstly, thank you for braving the weather today and coming out on what's a very uncharitable day outside. You're actually making history here today because it's the first day we're live streaming this. So in the future, if it is a bit cold, you can sit at home and watch it. Or if you can't make it for any reason, you can watch these talks a little bit later on. So that's really good. I'm thrilled because it means that my sister over in Swaziland will be able to watch this. My colleagues who are busy out on the floor will be able to watch it. And I was going to be thrilled because my mother down in Southland was even going to be able to watch it. But she doesn't trust technology, so she's got in her car and has driven 3 hours to be here. So thank you, Mum. Very good. Okay, so Furthest Frontier 2. Just another point is this is the first time I've got to speak to Tuesday Club for a while, and at first I just assumed that I'd offended Susan, but she's assured me that's not the case. And so I did want to acknowledge the passing of two very good OSA committee members, in Danny Knudsen and Bob Hopkins, who were really big supporters of Toitū and our projects here. So I just wanted to acknowledge them this morning. The first thing I think that's important to outline is why in the museum are we doing these films and how has this sort of evolved? It's not something that's naturally that museums sort of get into, but we're in a unique situation here at Toitū where this has sort of evolved. So I just need to go over that evolution quickly before we get into the nitty-gritty of Furthest Frontier 2. And of course, this goes back to 2011, 2012, where we were very fortunate to have our redevelopment here at the museum. And we're all pretty happy, I think, with the way the museum looks now and flows. One of the things perhaps that wasn't so clear for the planners at the time was how much work was going to go on after that. And of course, we have this beautiful museum now, but one of the things that's happened is we've now got a heck of a lot more donations that are offered to the museum. And we want to give them the due diligence. Everything's important, but our curators have to be very thorough in what comes into the museum. And in the last 20 years, collections care has gone to a next level as well. And so now it's just not as easy as putting things out on display and taking them off as we once did. When I first started here over 10 years ago, we would have between about 4 or 5, 6 temporary exhibitions a year. And now it's just, we can't keep up with that rate, unfortunately. The things that do go on display are stunning, but there's a lot of effort that goes into that. And in the background, of course, for those of you who have been fortunate enough to have some of our behind-the-scenes tours, you realise we've got all of these stores that take a lot of maintenance. And so our collections team is pretty busy. So when old Will, the exhibition developer, comes along and rubs his hands and says, let's have a nice temporary exhibition, well, I get a few frowns these days, and it takes a lot longer to be able to put these together. You might remember back in 2014, we were fortunate enough to have the World War I commemorative exhibition called Dunedin's Great War. And that was, in my opinion, a very good exhibition. We were quite fortunate that we managed to win a few awards, and it actually had over 120,000 visitors to it, which is the population of Dunedin, so over the length of its stay. But one of the things that was obvious was it took a lot of work for our collection staff to put all these things on display. And just in the middle there, though, you can see Aaron Fox talking. That's part of the journey of the Otago's film. And that was a really important sort of landmark film for us, because the Settlers Association, we'd never done anything like this before, they said, no, we'll back you on this, and managed to be one of the primary funders of Journey of the Otagos. And that was, of course, where we sent honorary Otago Settlers Association life member, Sean Brosnan, over to the battlefields of Europe and go not just where the New Zealanders went, but where the Otago troops went, and focus on some of those really important places. So this lovely green field here, that's actually the slight rise up to Bellevue Spur, and this is actually the field at Passchendaele, where over 100 Dunedin men died in just a few minutes in 1917. And there's been quite a few documentaries and things done like that on soldiers from New Zealand, but this was really important for us in Dunedin and wider Otago to follow exactly where our troops had been. And we were able to do this on a relatively small budget, to be honest, and because of Sean's, to be quite honest, because of his brilliance in being able to present and research. And one of the disappointing things about temporary exhibitions is you go to all this effort and then after 6 months it vanishes. And if you went, you got to see it, and that's great, but if you didn't go to see it, well, that's it, it's gone. And so one of the great things about the films I think that we've been making is this idea of enduring legacy. People can watch these things in the future, and it's a real sort of pinpoint in time. So the Journey of the Otagos is now down here in the Call to Arms gallery. People can go and sit down there and watch the episodes whenever they like. They're also been made online, so people can watch them on our YouTube channel. And it's just one part of that exhibition that's been able to be shared, even though the exhibition put away 6, 7, 8 years ago now. People can still come and watch that at the museum. So then we had the Chinese community come to us and say, well, we quite like what you did with the Journey of the Otagos there. Perhaps you'd like to follow how our community came into being. And that was really quite something to have a community come to us like that and suggest. And at the time, of course, you remember when the Chinese gardens came into being, it was quite controversial. People didn't really understand why there was a Chinese garden in Dunedin. And so through the great scholarly work of Dr. James Ning, and then combined with Sean, we managed to do the Journey to Lan Yuan, where we went to the places in Otago, and this is in Little Bourke Street in Melbourne, but also over into southern China, to see how that community came into being here in Dunedin, the backwards and forwards. And again, that idea of enduring legacy, it's now on display there in the Chinese garden. So if on a day like this, when the garden might not be as a nicer place to go for a bit of a wander around, you can still go up there into the tower room, keep warm, and learn a bit of the history there. So all 13 or 14 episodes are on display up there, and they've also actually been put online as well. So along came this nasty thing called coronavirus, and we've spent a lot of time trying to, I suppose the term is stay safe, but a lot of people have spent a lot of time at home, and we wanted to know, as a museum, how can we still provide informative, educational videos? And so we thought, well, look, we're quite happy to put these on. We're not making money out of these. The idea is we're trying to really get people to understand these stories and the importance of these places. So as I've said, we reopened in 2012, and one of the things we learnt from my colleagues up in Te Papa was when they reopened in 1998, wonderful big flash museum. But then their fear was they stayed stagnant for about 10, 15, 20 years and weren't able to, because they were new, well, there was no sort of real program of upgrading the galleries. And then after 15 years, they were getting a lot of complaints. Oh, you must be due to do something new. And we didn't want to fall into that trap, so we've been wanting to try and go through our gallery spaces and do what we call refresh them, give them a bit more life and take the feedback that we've received over the last 10 years. And so one of the examples that we've done just recently was the Gold Gallery. We got a fair bit of feedback about that. The directors at the time really wanted to make sure that we focused on Dunedin, the Dunedin gold story. But we got quite a lot of people saying, we want to know more about the gold fields. And we're really conscious we don't want to step on the other museums in the region, like the Lawrences or the Switzers, or the Lakes District Museums, who tell that story really well. But for people who might be just coming to Dunedin for a day and really want to get that essence of what the goldfields were like, we've been able to do that now through the gallery. And just in the corner there, you'll see we've got this this screen now. So one of the key ways we were able to do this was another wee project of, we called it the Gold of Otago, where Sean and Peter managed, the two curators, did a whole lot of research, and out of it we've got these 20 wee short films where for about 4 or 5 minutes you can find out about the Dunstan Rush or the Arrowtown Rush, how they got there, the different routes, how Dunedin fared. A lot of social problems came about from the gold rushes, and that's all the people can sit down and get that essence of what's going on around them. And so that's been a really kind of a progressive way that we've been able to look at our spaces and go, well, we need to keep refreshed. We don't want to fall into that trap of just being a new museum. We're coming up 10 years now since we reopened, so we're slowly starting to chip through these spaces and bring a little bit more life to them. And then, like I said, with the pandemic, we still wanted to be able to be relevant as a museum. So we've gone and put them. This is how they look on YouTube. For those of you who don't know YouTube, we've been able to list them all so people can online in their own home, they can watch all these videos themselves. So then the First Encounters Gallery, just through the door here. When it's come time to refreshing that, and we haven't really got onto the full refreshing program of that, but the feedback we were getting from visitors is they wanted to know more about that early period when the first Europeans arrived, how the interaction with early iwi went, and the feedback is we're not telling that story adequately. It's a real challenge in a museum to tell a story when you don't have an artefact or you don't have an object. And this period of time, there's not a heck of a lot sort of left or around, because a lot of it was the firsts, people arriving here, and in terms of the sealers and even the whalers, a lot of those people, those European people, were actually illiterate, and so there wasn't much legacy, much left behind from that time. But it's a really significant time period, and there's lots of really interesting things going on. So of course that brought about Furthest Frontiers, the first one that we did, where we went into Tamatea Dusky Sound, and of course all the significant things that happened there with Captain Cook's visit. Now that was always part of the first part of the plan. The second part of the plan was to do the rest of Fiordland. And then again, along came the pandemic, and the second Furthest Frontier actually got pushed back 3 times. And I say that with a straight face, but really I should be looking quite upset, because it took a lot of organising every time that got postponed. But I just put myself in our health workers' shoes, or other people like that every time these things happened, all of our plans, didn't they, all got put upside down. So I was able to, as my father would say, breathe through my nose and just accept that it was the way it had to be. But this is how 4 of those first episodes from Furthest Frontier, people can actually go and watch them in the First Encounter space now, they can touch them and find out a little bit about Cook's visit or the wreck of the Endeavour in 1795, and look at the work that the maritime archaeologists did in there. So Furthest Frontiers 2, we wanted to go to southern Fiordland. And obviously that's a little bit strange. Again, you kind of wonder, well, why is Toitū involved in that part of the world? Well, firstly, we look at the period from, it gets a little bit political, but from the whole Otago provincial time, and when Southland broke away for that time, Southland really just looked upon this, that was sort of the Southland province down here. The Otago province was quite a large area, and so we kind of do have a little bit of curatorial input over there. But being the nice people we were, we definitely approached other museums in that area and said, look, do you want to be part of this? And for the first one, they were definitely a little bit, not really. And now it's been really great that Southland Museum's come on board and said, look, if you do anything further in the future, we're keen to be a part of it now, and we can see the value of these sorts of things. But being way over in this bottom corner, it does create a few challenges. Chalky Inlet and Preservation Inlet are a good few hundred kilometres away. So the first thing to do was really to get a team of, as you can see, very good-looking individuals together, and everyone really had their role to play to make this happen. And there's only, 4 of us there from Toitū, and again, it was a challenge to get everyone in the COVID world together. A lot of health and safety goes into these things, a lot of health and safety. But we're there, so as you can see, we managed to get underway. And I assembled this team with the idea, there was a number of things. One, when you're making films, it's really good to have some expert comments. You know, people actually know what they're talking about. And then also, it's not cheap going to Fiordland, so you know, some people are able to bring a little bit of funding, share the costs a wee bit. Whereas going by ourselves, any of our organisations probably couldn't afford it, because heritage organisations, as we all know, often luck out a little bit on the funding organisations. And that's why the Settlers Association is so important with the support that they give Toitū. So I just want to introduce the team very quickly to you. This is Ron Bull, who whakapapas back to Oraka Aparima, so that's the Maori iwi down based in Riverton, very close to Preservation Inlet and Chalky Inlet as the crow flies, but I mean it takes a week or two to walk in from that part of the world. Now, Ron's cousin James, who carved the carved gateway out here, he came along with us into Dusky Sound. So he's the gentleman that talks about the first meeting of his ancestors with Captain Cook. James unfortunately couldn't come on this trip, so he put us on to Ron, who works down at the Polytech. And for those of you who have seen the films already, you'll know that Ron's a bit of a star. He really, he definitely brings things to life on TV. But Ron also has a lot of experience in Fiordland. He spent a lot of time in Doubtful Sound and in Dusky Sound, does a lot of things helping out trap lines and things like that. He works with artists about food. But this was a really special trip for Ron, because he'd never been into these southern fjords of Chalky and Preservation Inlets. So he was pretty quick to put his hand up when James passed over his number, and he just had a great time in there. This is Frank van der Hayden from Heritage New Zealand. He's actually the archaeologist for the West Coast Canterbury region. But when I got back in touch with Heritage New Zealand, they said Frank's the one that they'd like to come to update their archaeological sites. Now, all these people that came along on this trip, everyone's kind of got their little side hustles. And Frank's was to go on to everywhere that we went, anywhere close where there was an archaeological place that was known, he would be able to take photos and update it. And it's a normal thing that Heritage New Zealand wouldn't be able to do potentially financially, because it's an expensive place to get to. This is Kane Fleury. This is a colleague over at Otago Museum. Now, I asked Kane to come along because I knew that he was the assistant natural science curator up there at Otago Museum, and he's got a good knowledge of marine mammals. And one of the places we were going to was Cuddle Cove, the first shore-based whaling station in New Zealand. And I thought, what better to have than someone that knew actually something about whales and could talk a bit about it. But of course, he had his wee side hustle too. Being a natural science curator, he wanted to find out about the bug life, basically. He'll probably be disappointed I've called it bug life, but insects and things. And so here we are, everyone, after a big day's work, we're all sort of packing down for the night, and then no, Kane's got us getting in the wee boat in the darkened Fiordland, and here we are looking for rare types of insects, and I think he found 8 or 9 types that hadn't been seen for a while. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just holding a light and bashing through the bush. But he was a really good man to have on board with his expertise. Dr. Kurt Bennett, who came with us into Dusky Sound and was he's done his PhD on the Endeavour wreck, and after this trip now, he's actually the foremost experienced maritime archaeologist in Fiordland, because he's done 4 maritime surveys in there now. And there was 2 spots that we really wanted to have a good look at when we were in there. One was the whaling station at Cuddle Cove, have a look and see if there'd been anything left down there on the sea floor. And the other was the wharf site at Tioniroa, which was one of those boom-to-bust ghost towns in the gold period that sort of popped up for about 10 or 20 years, and then it just went. But it was quite late in the gold period, around about 1900, so there was actually a few photographs and things, and you could see, well, there's quite a substantial settlement there. And so, of course, he went and had a look and found all sorts of interesting things. And again, great to have that underwater footage and someone explaining about maritime archaeology, because it's a relatively new field in New Zealand. And then we've got 2 Toitū colleagues here. We've got Chris Quack, who's he's actually our AV technician here at Toitū, but he's a real guru when it comes to things like sound, AV equipment. In fact, what he's got there is a thing called a gimbal, and that's in its last moments before it died, because a freak wave actually destroyed that, and we had to use our gumboots to bail out on that boat. Don't worry, Mum, we're all completely safe. It's fine. But as you can see, both Chris and Peter here, who you might know, are both well rugged up from the sandflies. So it wasn't just the organisation that was a real challenge getting into Fiordland. We had to be well prepared. Now, Peter came along. He's the maritime curator here. That's one of his fields. So he did a lot of the research, and he did a lot of the ghost editing. So while Sean's standing there and spelling off things, it's always a good idea just to have someone reading the scripts, because it's a long way to go back if he says 1961 instead of 1861. So it's really important that someone is looking at what we're saying there. And then, of course, this guy. So most of you will know the curator here, Sean Brosnan. It's really important to emphasise the difficulty of putting these together, but then Sean's found this real niche, because by researching it and writing it, he's able to regurgitate it really well. Now, we had 6 days of filming when we went to do this, but because of the weather, we only ended up doing 4.5. Now, Sean managed to churn out 61 pages of text in those 4.5 days, which is a whole lot of him being able to, we do not many takes. We had a whole lot of places to go, and I'll show you the dots in a minute. But Dunedin and the wider Otago heritage area is really blessed to have someone like Sean who's been able to share his knowledge in these ways, because it's not an easy thing, and it's something that we wouldn't be able to probably afford to do to pay a big presenter, but don't tell Sean that. So here we are at Pusica Point, and you can see Sean's got his, that's one of his wee wad of pages there. I'm no doubt telling him something clever to do. In the background you can see they've got that's the lighthouse back there, or what's there today. And it doesn't look windy, but Pusica Point is one of the windiest places in the country, and Sean got a bit of a telling off from me when he waved his wad of scripts when we were on the boat nearby, and we lost a couple of the pages, and last seen heading towards Antarctica. So luckily, in good Boy Scout manners, we did have a spare, but he had to read it in the cabin after that. He wasn't allowed to look up on the deck. So about 4:30 one morning, we piled into the van from Dunedin and headed up to Te Anau. From Te Anau, we're heading into this area, and this is just a little bit. We actually caught the chopper this time, as far as Dusky Sound, and one of the key problems is there's hardly any. This was just post-COVID. There was hardly any tourist operators down here where we wanted to go. So to link up with them, we had to get either to up here to Doubtful Sound, or with the people we went with last time, who was Fiordland Expeditions. Their boat was moored down here, right at the top at Supper Cove, at Dusky Sound. So in we went in Te Anau, into the chopper, and I mean, this was a glorious part of the trip, to be honest, to be on a beautiful day like this across Lake Te Anau, across Lake Manapoti, and into Supper Cove, where all of a sudden this tiny little boat appears, and you realise you're going to be landing on top of that boat. That's the way. Down the Spey River there, and into, and there's our little boat just appearing there now. So, and we actually had to get all the crew, and we had to take two boatloads, and people came out. So people that had been staying on the boat went back. So that's how you sort of cut the costs a wee bit, is by making sure you got back loads. Once we got on the boat in Supper Cove, it was round to Preservation Inlet. It was about 4.5 hours, but we had to make the most of at the outset of going, we knew that there was bad weather forecast for the far end of our trip, and so we knew that if we went really hard and we could probably get most of it done before that weather came, but it was pretty bad forecast, so we really pinned our ears back. So on this first day, like I said, we'd already been in the van for about 4 hours from Dunedin, but once we got to Supper Cove, 4 hours round, then we did some filming in Chalky Inlet, and then round to our mooring for the night. That wasn't a bad thing. This is our boat, the Toitū 2. You can see that on the top there, that's the helicopter pad. And then on the boat, all the way down, it's about 40 k's from one end to the other of, or was it 40 miles? Yeah, of Dusky Sound. And then right round the coast, round West Cape here, and you can just see Chalky Island there in the distance. And that's into Chalky Inlet. So in we went, and that's about where Sean lost some of those pages actually. And so up here, Chalky Inlet, over here, Preservation Inlet. All those red dots represent places we had to go and film. There was all places of historic significance in those little red dots. There's about 30 of them, and like I said, we had about 6 days to film at these red dots, but we actually knocked it off in 4.5, like I said, because of this huge storm that was approaching. But you wouldn't have known it on these first days. As we tinkered around, we used a little tender boat here. It's fair to say it was a pretty rickety little boat. We had to pump it up quite often, which doesn't really fill us with a lot of confidence now saying that, but we got to all the places that we really wanted to go. And these look like nice beaches, but there were plenty of rocky or tough places to get off as well. So yeah, we spent a lot of time in that wee boat, and a lot of time pumping it up too. There's Chris with the camera. So by then I think the gimbal, the wee thing that he held, had been covered in salt water and had been destroyed, so we're sort of using a lot of handheld things. And this just gives us, this wee clip here just gives us a variety of the different places we filmed. So this is Cuddle Cove with Kurt going in and doing his survey. And then here's Sean and Chris talking a little bit about the whalers. In the background, Frank's there. This is the gravesite of William Doherty, who's quite a famous old prospector. And then here at the Par site at Matuira. So you can see there's quite a variety of different landscapes. And even there, poor Chris hated this because, of course, of the sound of the boat throbbing away. But you could see the storm starting to think about hitting there. So it was a real adventure. Had to be quite physically fit in the places we went to. We had to get up the top of this Par site and had to use a rope to go up it. And anyone that's spent any time in the bush knows that just going through the bush in general can be, when you're not on a path, can be quite hard going. Now this was the young men's quarters at the top of the boat. This had changed last time. There's actually a bunk and these 2 beds up here, so we all piled in there. Now this is it looking really tidy. Normally there was a whole lot of filming equipment, diving equipment, all sorts, scripts, a real mess. Of course, Sean was downstairs in the luxury suite. He had the whole bottom cabin to himself. He didn't really, he was sharing with Ron, but we like to give him a hard time. And of course, we're very sustainable on these trips, so we just ate what we could find. The divers, when they were down doing their survey, happened to find a few scallops, and even a blue cod happened to find its way into their diving bag as well. And now just to quickly outline the trip back as well. For those of you who've already seen the films, you'll know that we did hit a bit of bad weather when we tried to get to a place called Grono's Cave, which is the very southwest corner of New Zealand. And we had an option. We could go into one of these places over here, which is an old sealing camp, might find something, but we really wanted to get in to Chalky Island there to see the rock art that had been estimated to be about 800 years old. And so we had to make a choice, because way out here at the Tasman Sea, things were getting pretty dark, and the skipper was really keen for us to get up here before the storm hit. and you'll see the storm was quite something. Now this is inside the Sounds, so normally lovely still water, but the wind was so fierce that it was actually ripping the water off the top there. As we actually made for cover in Dusky Sound. We went into a place called Goose Cove through this tiny little entranceway you'll see coming up here, and hunkered down for a full day. So we actually go through that way through there as well. This is the end of January, I might add. So after a lovely 4 days of beautiful sunshine, we all of a sudden got hit by that. But by then we'd done our filming. We had that in our pocket, and we're really grateful that we were able to go the way we did. So later on the next day, we managed to sail up through what's called the Acheron Channel here on the side of Resolution Island, so it was a bit more protected. And then we made for all the way down to Deep Cove there. It was too stormy for the chopper to come pick us up, and so we're probably a bit safer on the boat there. And then, of course, if anyone that's been to Doubtful Sound, you go over the Wilmot Pass in a bus, and then across Lake Manapuri, and then back to Dunedin. So that was the getting in and getting out. And this is just a promo
Blind panic.
of the actual
The
what we
American
filmed.
sailors took off into the bush and began heading for Preservation Inlet. But the whale, thrashing about with its tail, smashed the whaleboat to smithereens and then turned on the crew in the water.
So the tikanga of keeping things in balance was very important.
A stinking, bloody scene of carnage. And one 20th century keeper's wife recalled a peacefulness here that she just never experienced anywhere else.
It's an absolutely stunning place. The outlook is amazing.
The miners' boat capsized and sank with all their provisions on board.
Some people took a gamble to come here, and like big gambles too.
Cut off with the outside world and always plagued by hordes of vicious sandflies.
To put my feet in these Tapuai, these footprints, so those old people that came through this place.
So I should point out that one of the advantages this time compared to the previous trip too is this time the Department of Conservation got on board a bit more with us and waived a lot of the fees that we were going to have to that we paid the previous time. I think they could, when you can show people something that you've already done, it really helps understand the importance and the end product, I suppose. And we had Dr. Matt Schmidt also. He was supposed to come along with us, and you probably come across him in Heritage before, but he had to pull out the week before because he had to go down to a heritage emergency. Not quite sure what a heritage emergency is, but he had to go to a heritage emergency down in Stewart Island. But he still appears in the films, and that was just a real great thing to have Doc on board this time when they can see that the benefits that can come of a collaboration like this. So I just want to quickly outline too some of the, I did call them side hustles, that was a bit cruel, some of the achievements that everyone else did, as well as ourselves in getting the films done while we were in there. Because Dr. Bennett, while he was in there, managed to do the first maritime surveys of the Port Bun whaling station, so that's the first whaling station in all of New Zealand, shore-based, and also that Te Aotearoa Wharf. There's two towns in there, two ghost towns, Cromarty, which there is actually quite a flash lodge there now for those who know, and we went and knocked on the front door and we got a lovely tour around by the gentleman from Tauranga who owns that, but also Te Aotearoa, which, well, there's not much there now. I mean, it's just all flax and sandflies really, but the wharf is still there. There's these 2 or 3 piles on the beach, and then underneath Kurt managed to find bits of pottery and pipes and things like that, which is quite incredible. Frank managed to get to over 40 archaeological sites and update those records. So that's, I think, a real achievement, because that's something they probably wouldn't have been able to do unless we'd gone on board, gone in and invited them to come along. And these sites range from early iwi sites, we saw the rock art there, right the way to the Stella, the big rusting hulk behind them there, which was the government steamer, which actually helped build the lighthouse, used to supply the depots down in the sub-Antarctic islands. It had Te Whiti and Tohu, the two Taranaki people that were basically the pacifists who didn't like what the government was doing up there. They got toured around New Zealand on board that ship. So a whole lot of history in that one rusty piece of ship, which is now holed up in Chalky Inlet in Northport, which to a lot of people would never see or know these stories, but thanks to this research sort of, all being combined, we've been able to tell that story. So a real variety of these sites there, and there was, there's gold mines, there's a whole lot of history in this area, which Frank was able to go in and update these records. Kurt managed to publish a few academic papers, so that adds to what he did up in Dusky Sound with the Waikari ship that sank in 1910, and also the Endeavour wreck up there. So that's all come out of this. We managed to find the cave where this rock art had been located 40 years ago and update that, so there hadn't been people back to update that in all this time. And of course now rock art is becoming a really important thing, and you may have been to the Te Ana Centre up there in Timaru. But this is probably the most remote site known in New Zealand. I mean, this is, Chalky Inlet, southwestern New Zealand, miles away from kind of anywhere. And we were really grateful to be able to find that. We didn't spend too much long in there because I think there were some penguins making noises nearby. And Kane and his bugs, he managed to find a whole lot of bugs and was pretty happy about that. You can see I'm next to him looking quite confused there. This is also quite a good picture that shows how we used our time really well. It wasn't like a scheduled day where you go and do your thing and Peter does his thing and I'll do my thing. It was, we had to make the most of the good weather. So in the background you can see Kurt, and you can see he's busy there sort of staking out his survey lines. I think Sean's up in the bush here trying to see if there's any remnants. There's still sort of a stone hearth and a fireplace from that original whaling station, so that's quite exciting. So everyone was you had to really be quite useful for your time. But one of the benefits of going this time in the summer as opposed to going to Dusky Sound in the winter, in Dusky Sound we really had good filming light from between about 9 o'clock in the morning to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, as we all know in this part of the world, the sun gets low and it was quite dark, and there was a couple of times that Chris actually requested we go back and film places because he said, look, it's just too dark. Well, going at this time of year, it's brilliant sunshine by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. So we really could make the most of that, and yeah, we managed to. You see, look, it's a brilliant, beautiful day. This is on the beach here at the landing, what's called the landing site there for the Pusika Point Lighthouse. So we managed to get our 10 episodes. Dusky Sound, we only had 7, but this was, so we'd actually got more content this time in the same amount of time. We just sort of packed it on in, and so I think that was quite a good achievement. These guys all look pretty happy here. I think it's because I just told them that we'd managed to catch some scallops for tea. And here is everyone apart from Chris, because Chris is taking the picture. So that's actually just before we climbed up that rope up to the top of that par site. So everyone was happy here. By the time I got to the top, they were a little bit puffed and perhaps not quite so thrilled. One thing I didn't want to go into today, and I won't, but is the other end of things, which is the editing and all the organisation and stuff, and that's really my role. But to be honest, it is just the way it sounds. It's a lot of ringing up with people, a lot of health and safety forms, a lot of making sure people are available, and it's not very fun. But if you do it right, you can really achieve some quite fun things. Many of you will know that actually since we've done this, we've actually been to film the UK side of the Journey to New Edinburgh, which I'll put a bit of a plug in. I'm not going to talk too much about that today, don't let any cats out of the bag, but Sean is going to speak to the Tuesday Club about that in March, and that's when it's going to be released, just after that talk, so you'll get a wee behind the scenes insight there. But in many ways that was almost easier than something like this, because a lot of it's an English speaking nation, and there's the history goes back hundreds of years, and people have written PhD theses on it. In here, well, we're sort of bush bashing and doing a lot of it ourselves, so it was quite exciting. So I've managed to finish with about 5 or 10 minutes to go there. I can open the floor to questions, as long as they're good questions. You can see all these now. Some of you would have seen them. They are available on the museum's YouTube channel, but I am aware that many people don't necessarily like going onto YouTube or understand how. So we're going to do some screenings here, and Mary and Chris are busy in the background currently sort of working on that, trying to work out when the best times will be, because all 10 episodes, back to back. It's over 2 hours worth, but we are hopefully going to do some screenings here as well, just at an appropriate time. So yeah, I'll open the floor for questions just quickly.
Yeah, I've got one question there, and that clip that was on at the beginning, there was a locomotive-style boiler shown there. Whereabouts was that? What's the history behind it?
Well, that's just above the ghost town of Cromarty, and that was part of the boiler used for the gold mining in that part of the world. So there's actually 2 or 3, and it's a real sight when you're going through these bush and all of a sudden you come across these enormous pieces of metal. And in the gold mining episode, we actually talk about how the massive investment, I mean, the pick and shovel gold mining came and went really quickly in preservation and let, but then the companies were sophisticated enough to put in big investment to try and get to the courts. And one of the places we didn't go to was down the Wilson River, because it was going to take a day just to get there and back to look at the old stamper battery there, and it was a day we really didn't have when you've only got 6 days to do all this filming. But going into that environment, and of course it's so wet, and we were fortunate actually, and the divers loved it, because anyone remembers in the summer it was actually a drought, and Fiordland hadn't had rain for a really long time, so it was great for the divers. They had great visibility. But the poor old forest looked very sad, because it really needs that moisture. But by golly, the hardness it must have been to try and get a lot of that equipment into those locations, just fascinating. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Did you find out where the whalers came from?
Where they came from? Well, let me think. That was George Bunn, so he was the person who sort of initiated the whaling station. He was from Sydney. And George Prince is the other person we look at there. Now, he went on to become quite a wealthy Southland landowner, but he was a boy of about 12 or 13, and they gave him a job there. And I think his job was to help mend the barrels. And he goes on and talks about how it was a pretty rough environment. A lot of them were either children of convicts or convicts themselves who had been freed. So it was a bit of a rough environment. But the story we tell is how he recalls the first Christmas there, and all these big hardened men, they all put together a Christmas stocking and put a wee toys in for him, which I think is quite a nice anecdote that's been passed down through the ages. So, in terms of did we find anything under the water, we didn't find much actually. Most of the things that Kurt found, he actually puts it down to the later gold mining period, about 60 years later, where there was a couple of mines put down in Cuddle Cove as well, and it's really hard to date some of that metal, but he'll look further into that as well. So it was pretty exciting, really. Might have been a question down the back there, was there? More.
I think it's fabulous that we do these videos, and I just love watching them during lockdown, and I haven't seen this one, but I think we really need to thank you for going and doing them, because they're just so good.
Oh, thank you, Moira. I think you're supposed to clap at that, aren't you? I know. No, I probably underestimated it. It is a lot of fun making them, but we're busy. We are busy on busy doing these things. And I see Chris is snuck in the back there, and he's nodding his head too. So he's the poor guy that's getting bossed around all the time. So he's the patience of a saint. So if you guys are happy, Chris and Mary, I'll finish it there, and I might go and have a cup of coffee. And if you'd like to talk to me, I'll be down the corner there. And thank you for not heckling, much appreciated. And just that plug again for the March Tuesday Club talk, which Sean will talk about the most recent thing, which I'm busy editing at the moment, which is the Journey to New Edinburgh, in which we've done 100 stories on early Otago and Southland settlers, plus we've done a 2-hour documentary on the founding of Otago. So stay tuned, that'll be a cracker. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Will. One question I wanted to ask, what is the balance between actual filming and actual editing?
It depends how motivated I am in the day. One of the disappointing things, have you stopped the live feed? Oh, okay, no, I won't be too honest then. I actually had this ready to go. I had this edited 6 weeks after we'd finished, because we were going to Great Britain to do so I had to really, and I didn't know when they wanted to release it. And so we had it really pronto, and of course it's only come out in the last month or two, but we had it, so in my opinion I probably haven't done as tidy a job in this one as I did in the Dusky Sound one, because I was probably pushing it a bit, but I mean, we filmed that in 4.5 days and it took me 6 weeks. The editing is quite...
Quite a lot.
And
Yeah.
it's not just me that does the editing. Chris has to do a lot of, trying to get the sound levels right, and we caption everything now, so people that are hard of hearing can read as we go. So there's quite a few we knickknacks that go into it as well.
Right. Thank you. And thank you, Will, for giving this talk, telling us the importance of the film side of what Toitū does. Yeah, it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.